Ready. Play.
Right, we're here to do something that I've never done before on Talking Tennis. Of course, we've done many power rankings. Nick mainly, I think predominantly actually, or maybe even entirely, done the WTA ones since certainly 2023 anyway, I think, one of the slams early on that year. And they've been a regular feature on the show since. We've also done lots of power rankings for the ATP. I think it's been spread around the team. I've done most of them, but I know other members of the team have done them too. But on this occasion, we're going to do something a little bit different. First of all, we're going to do 3, I reckon, but that's a rough guesstimate, just because I know we've got Canada. We've got Washington now. We'll have Canada and then Cincinnati. I think that'll be nice stopping points ahead of the US Open, because, of course, this is an ATP US Open power rankings. But the other unique feature is the fact that I'm doing it with an opponent, maybe, if you like, in the form of Brenner. How are you, Brenner?
I'm great. Looking forward to this.
Of course, we'll have many similarities. We'll have lots of things that we pretty much agree on, but it'd be interesting to share our thought process. I'm going to begin by saying the near misses, those that are not in the 10 right now, but who knows? In 7 days' time, if they're lifting that trophy in Washington, I'm almost certain that will propel them, given that they're so close to my top 10 right now. The 3 names I've got that are close, of course, 2 of these are competing in Washington, 1 isn't. Fils, who didn't make it because of health, and therefore we're not 100% sure when he's going to be returning to the court. Some optimism that he'll be in New York, but no certainties even on that. So that made it an easy one to sort of cross off. I'm going to mention Rublev, although actually he's not on my near misses. I didn't have him as a near miss, but he's got some decent pedigree on a hard court slams, getting to quarterfinals on a regular basis. So he can get a mention. And the other names are going to be both also in Washington, because I think Rublev is in Washington too, right?
Correct.
And they are Holger Rune and Francis Tiafoe. Tiafoe, because he comes alive at this time of year. And, you know, he's a contender to win that title in Washington and has some good US Open pedigree. So that's a huge thing. So you could have probably not played that well for a year, and you're still in the conversation for the power rankings. You know, you could be ranked 40 in the world and done nothing for a year. But if you've been in 2, 3, 4 US Open semifinals, you come into the conversation as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, the other one is Holger Rune. We know his potential. We know what he's capable of on hard courts and clay and grass as well. He's just not been delivering that much. And his US Open pedigree is mixed at best. What are my US Open Holger Rune memories? Tweets about not knowing which court he's going to be playing on, or he knows what court he's on, but he's joking about it in terms of where to find him. A horrible first-round defeat for him to Nakashima last year. He was just crushed. And the other one is a bit more positive, which is actually taken a set off Novak Djokovic in 2021, I think. So that was like probably the first time for the casual and even beyond casual fans that he comes to our attention. And obviously a year later, he's winning Paris-Bercy and huge things are expected of him. But so those were my near misses. Any near misses you want to highlight, Brenner?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, Holger Rune. He's right there, obviously. You talk about the talent, his ability. It's unquestioned. You just don't know when he's going to bring it or what he's going to give you on the day. And I even looked that up. 2021, that's when he came through qualifying. So that's kind of what started his campaign. But yeah, we haven't seen it at the US Open really at all. And so that's why he is on that near miss, but of course has that potential. So you can't count him out. And I think the best of 5 sets does help him, but he is one of those guys who does mental lapse easily, right? He's quick to throw away a set. So we'll start there. My second one is going to be Karen Khachanov.
Yeah.
I think, obviously a crushing defeat last year. He loses from, what was it, for love up in the
against Dan
fifth.
Evans. Yeah.
Dan Evans, one of the longer matches in US Open history. I think just a bit over 5 hours, 30 minutes. I was actually on the grounds for that one as well. But anyway, a really really, really solid player when it comes to these types of courts, right? Fairly low bouncing, pretty quick. And I think Wimbledon, he had to show a little bit of that experience, that ability that, we've seen in years prior, that top 20 player in a sense. And I think that
He
can
won't
come
let
out.
you down very often. He's not a player that, okay, Dan Evans, that's probably the one example. Was
Yeah.
that first or second round? First round.
First.
So he's not someone that he's going to show you up very often. He's a safe bet if you did have him in your 10, but obviously you're saying he was a near miss for my near misses, by the way. He didn't quite make the near miss list, if you like. He was on the next list. Actually, he's on the next list with Rublev, if I'm honest. I know I mentioned Rublev,
Right.
but he wasn't on my near miss list. And Fils quickly went off because of the injury situation. But Rune and Tiafoe were 11 and 12, basically. They were the next ports of call. But yeah, Hatchinoff as well. I remember semi-finals in 2022. Remember that match he had with Casper? I never thought he was winning that match. I was in the stadium for that one, by the way, in that semi-final. I remember an epic rally they had, which both players, but particularly Hatchinoff, can be involved in epic rallies because of the nature of the beast. What was the match you mentioned, by the way, off air? Just before we went live, and you said, I know it wasn't Evans Hatchinoff. There was another match you said off air, or I was at that match. Which one was it?
It was Nakashima Rune.
Oh, Nakashima Rune.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a very important.
Just never got going. And it was early break, and Nakashima, does well behind the serve, and good on US soil. I'd say like that was kind of it for the near misses. The other two that I would pair together is De Minaur and Musetti. Both strong talents.
Sure.
But when it comes against the big guys, they just kind of lack that ability to.
There'll be many people that are tuning in, and by the way, we're gonna have two versions of this. I'm actually almost saying this for the non-members. I may leave this in. We're just going to put this unedited version out for those that are members, and you can become a member from as little as $2, €2, or £2 a month. You'll get little bonuses such as videos such as these that'll be unedited, but you'll occasionally get interviews that will be for exclusively for members only, for ATP and WTA players, and a few other bits and pieces. And of course, you'll be supporting the channel, but there will of course be an edited version as well, a polished version for everyone to watch as well. Anyway, okay, if you're ready, Brenner, we'll get into it, shall we?
Let's do it.
So maybe my most controversial choice, I think it might well be. I think it's a choice that maybe not many people will have. I think some of those near misses, you'll already have people in the comments section below going, why haven't you got Rune in or Musetti or De Minaur and so on and so forth? I think there are cases for those players, of course. This one might surprise. Jakub Mensik. I've got him in at 10. Just see players year in, year out that do very well in North America in March and April. And of course, I'm talking about the Sunshine Double, and then disappear for a few months. Disappear is a strong word. He hasn't quite disappeared. We know he did really well. He played a really good match against Bublik, I think, in Madrid. And, he's there or thereabouts in conversations for going into second weeks at the two Summer Slams that we had in Europe. But he has sort of just got off the radar slightly, let's say that, rather than disappeared. And I've seen it so many times with players that happens, and then they reappear for the hard court season. I mean, I guess the most high profile of those players would be Daniil Medvedev, but he's never far from our thinking, especially at Wimbledon, because he's been so good and he's been so established across the slams, albeit a bit less this year. But yeah, I've gone with him for number 10. And yeah, he won Miami. And I think hard courts is probably going to be where he's at for most of his career in terms of where we sort of have him in our thinking of potential winners. And I think that'll only grow with age. And right now, yeah, someone like Rune and Tiafoe, for example, they haven't done anything like Mensik has done this year, winning a 1,000 like that. So yeah, he's my number 10. Anyway, you can either respond to that. You can of course, you may well disagree. Tell me your number 10 if you like as well, but also you can wrap up a bit of why you don't have Mensik in there.
No, Mensik, I don't have Mensik in my top 10, and I didn't have him on my near misses, and maybe that's fault on my own, but I'm still struggling to maybe just have full belief in Mensik. Like to say, I'm not a Mensiko yet, but I just think there are some lapses, and I'm not necessarily confident in terms of knowing what I'm going to get And let's be honest, the kid's still 19 years old. I think we're very not necessarily fooled by that, but the big frame, the professional mannerism, maybe that's a stretch. At times he can be throwing a little pity party, but he has the tools to get there. In Miami, very similar courts, right? Big serve. I think the backhand's amazing, very low bouncing. So
I sort of see, just quickly on that point,
yeah.
I sort of feel, and should really know the court speeds off by heart, and I don't. I sort of feel as though it's kind of in between Indian Wells and Miami. Miami being a bit quicker than probably the US Open, although I'd love to someone can correct me on this, especially in the comments below. But I feel as though it's a bit slower than Miami and a bit quicker than Indian Wells. That's how I see the US Open generally.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair result. It kind of blanking it on this in my head. There's 3 courts or 3 tournaments that use, I don't remember what the material they use, but it was Miami, US Open. Oh, and maybe it was Indian Wells.
This year, Indian Wells changed.
To use it, but then
surface, But the conditions still remain pretty slow because of the desert and everything else.
They held, but yeah, I'd say US Open is kind of somewhere in the middle. I don't think that's a bad
Who's your number 10?
Shout. Number 10 is Tommy Paul.
Yeah.
And I think Tommy, it's a little hard because he's taken some time off recently. But I think that also benefits him, right? He's one of those guys that needs to relax. He's just, he's a fun, excited guy, right? He needs that time to himself, and I think that's a great place to start for him in terms of like just getting ready for the US swing in general.
Do we know what Tommy Paul's and Jakub Mensic's next tournaments are, by the way? Because I don't think either are in Washington, are they? So
I don't think either of them are in Washington.
I mean, Tommy Paul's obviously just got married, but I think
engaged. I think, but yeah,
engaged. Sorry, totally. But I think his health is returning. He's a little bit ahead of. There's certain players that are also going to be included in R10, but there are big question marks regarding their health. But Fils, for example, is a bit further back than Tommy Paul. Tommy Paul at least is back on court and has played matches, albeit, he went out in the second round at Wimbledon. But yeah, anyway, I've got. Can I go to number 9, or do you want to elaborate a bit more on Tommy?
No, you were correct to say that neither of them are playing in Washington, so we will likely see them in Toronto.
Yeah. I've got Tommy Paul number 9. So there we go. Again, I feel as though, I love him on a hard court. Anyway, Tommy Paul lost to Jannik Sinner, the eventual winner last year in New York. So, this is, again, not quite Tiafoe levels of time to shine, but this is a good period of the season for him. For me, when he's healthy, he's easily a top 10 player. And if he is healthy, and I'm just assuming that the next few weeks will help him gather some momentum, and by the time we get to New York, I think he'll have plenty of match wins under his belt, particularly as we've obviously had quite a few withdrawals from Canada. That will help him get those match wins, and he, maybe, if anything, he might end up peaking before New York. That might be a concern. But yeah, Tommy Paul at number 9 for some of the reasons you've highlighted: pedigree, hard courts. We're just going to assume on him we've got a bit more detail regarding his health. Should be good. Who's your number 9?
Frances Tiafoe.
Okay.
Obviously a near miss for you. For me, I just can't leave him out. When we see this little bunch that we kind of are talking about now in the tennis world, anywhere from ranking 5 to 20.
You were at the match that he played against Artur Fils. Again, someone else has already been in the conversation in this episode, but you were at that match in Miami, right?
That is correct. I was.
It was a racket smash
from Fils, but
Fils won the match.
Ends up taking it. Yeah. Seesaw kind of match towards the end. A lot of emotions. But I just think it's hard to not necessarily count him out, but on U.S. soil, he's already proved it. So
Cincinnati final last year, I believe.
Yeah.
Which then gave us a clue before losing to Jannik. Gave us a clue that he was going to be, because he hadn't really maybe had a huge amount of. Well, he lost to Alcaraz in 5. Was it the Wimbledon last year? 4 or 5 sets.
Yeah, it was 5.
Which probably did give us a bit of a clue that he was sort of coming back to something approaching his best form. And then his US Open was defined for me by one match, beating Ben Shelton, his nemesis from a couple of years or a year before, I think. And he was a shadow of himself in the first match with Ben Shelton, but the match he had last year was arguably the best match of the tournament. And yeah, one of the reasons I didn't have him in my 10, although there's all this pedigree, and if he wins Washington, as I say, in a week from now or so, I'm sure he will be in it. I don't know. I just feel as though I see him play like that Fils match actually has scarred me a bit. I know I just sort of was watching that and just thought, you know what? I think this Tiafoe's not winning this. He's just not probably at, and it was very close. It was a super close match, and there were points and games that Tiafoe probably should have won. But yeah, sort of that expression that it felt like it was on Fis's racket, slightly more than Francis's. And I watched quite a few of Francis's matches and feel that despite a lot of the heroics that he does pull off, and I think he did really well to reach the semis, Tiafoe, in 2022. I think there was a little bit of a skew in terms of his match with Rafa, and Rafa was, especially his service speeds were well off it, and just everything. He was sort of just rushing back for that US Open from the ab injury he had at Wimbledon, and I think it really came too soon. But it's a slam, and you don't have another one until the following year. So, but the other thing was Rublev was just really off it. I was at that match in New York in 2022, and just Rublev sort of just not quite, delivering on the bigger stage, and Francis could. He did really well to push Carlos to 5 sets in the semis, of course, and that was a fun match. But yeah, I see it, but I want to see Washington before I bring him into my top 10, let's say.
Who's your 8?
Do you want to add anything to Francis, or should we go number 8?
Who's your 8?
Daniil Medvedev. Again, some people think I've put him high. Some people think I've put him low. So I think I have personally, I have to have him in my 10. Is he? Can you reveal? Is he in your 10?
He's my 8.
Okay, he's your 8 as well.
Yeah.
And I guess so. Therefore, I think if he just won a couple more matches, if he just doesn't have such a horrible Wimbledon, let's say, and maybe gets to the third round, then suddenly he's probably going even higher than 8, because of course he's still got I'm not saying he's winning another slam. I'm not sure about that. And with every sort of slam, hard court slam that goes past, Grand Slam final was 2023, and he really disappointed, I think, in that final. Yes, I think maybe even if he brought a slightly better game and a better tactic against Novak and certain points that I thought he didn't play very well, I think even if he'd done all of that, maybe he still doesn't win the match, but it goes 4 or even 5 sets, and we go, yeah, Daniil is still very, very close. But he was so far off Novak in so many ways, especially tactically, and the serve volley was dominating him that day. But anyway, that's a tangent. He's still a hard court specialist, and his pedigree at the US Open in particular is wild. I mean, probably the second best pedigree on the tour after Novak Djokovic in terms of 2019 final, 2020 semi-final, 2021 winner, 2022. I'm just trying to remember where he got to in 22 quarter. I think he lost to Nick Kyrgios either in the fourth round or the finals. Fourth round, I think. That was probably a disappointing one. But then 2023 final, 2024. I think somebody meant. Well, I think we were talking about this with Fergus earlier. I actually don't remember. Where he got to in
off the top of my head.
We're about to find out. It was deep-ish. It was like fourth round of quarterfinals. Loses to Jannik Sinner in 2024 in the quarterfinal. So again, I mean, basically, he's not failed to get to the fourth round since 2018. So, if he gets to the fourth round, he's already in the first 16 players, and he's been in the quarterfinals in all but 1 year in the last 7. So yeah, and he's vulnerable because he's just losing a lot of tennis matches, and even quite early. I'm actually interested. What did he do in Australia this year? I know we got to the final last year, of course. That was his last final, of course. Australian Open 2024. My bad.
Oh, it was Tien. It was Lerner Tien.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bad one. So he's had a bad Grand Slam year. Round 2 in Australia. French Open, I'm going to say second or third round, was it? Did he lose to Cam Norrie there, maybe?
First, yeah. It was Cam Norrie first
Cam
round.
Norrie in the first round.
And then he goes out again.
He's not made a third round yet.
Bonzi.
So that's the dilemma you have. But
Yep.
he's my number 8. Do you want to add anything to Medvedev?
Not much. I would just say, like, it kind of has to change at a point. This is the perfect time. I feel like this is an opportunity to kind of reset, but just, get a little spark. And I thought he really played well in Halle. Unfortunate to go against a monster in Bublik. But, he could have come out victorious. And, who knows what happens if it does go 3. So, yeah, good time.
Do you want to go first with your number 7? So that way you get...
I'll do that. I'm going with Jack Draper at 7. And this is a tough pick because I feel like if I didn't hear about the arm injury that came out today, he won't be playing in Toronto or likely Cincinnati, but we'll see. So it's going to be no lead-up events for him. So that's why he is there. But, the track record, the progress that he's made as a player, and like just having the opportunity to play, more big matches. He got, I think, the last few slams, US that is, and even Australia, it's still been a little bit of physical, whether it's fatigue or something bothering him. But that's why it's kind of like, it's sad that I have to put him this far down because I do think he's, a top 5 player across all surfaces.
Yeah, and of course, winning Indian Wells, again, coming back to that sort of just a small part of my thinking, not huge, but just if you did well in Indian Wells or Miami or both X particularly year, then you do come into my thoughts for these kind of things. He's also my number 7, by the way. Pretty much for all the reasons you said. I think I would have him somewhere between 4 and 6 if he was healthy. But that thing, and he's also one to keep an eye on who may end up sort of slipping a bit, because he might not. If we get a few random winners, let's say we get a semi-random winner in Washington, i.e. someone who's ranked outside the top 20, 25 players in the world, then he may well hold at 7, if you like. And maybe if Fritz Fritz goes out first round, or Shelton goes out first round, or some of these other big hitters, if you like, in that tournament, then just by virtue, sometimes by not playing, you might creep up. But he is also going to be vulnerable to some of the near misses in particular, such as Rune and Tiafoe. If they end up having good tournaments and then squeezing into the 10 in the coming weeks, then he's going to be somebody that just by virtue of not playing may end up slipping out of the 10. But that's something to keep an eye on. Who's your number 6?
Ben Shelton. And I think that it does have a lot to do with the injury, but for me, it's just a big time match kind of ability. He's a big time player. He tries to meet the moment, and he's a bit fearless. I think, he's gotten the experience to play all of these guys at this point and playing all of these, different kind of moments, atmospheres, venues. But at home, we've seen how just such a force. In the best of 5 format, he does so well with, and he's just like coming up with amazing kind of shot making and courage in these breakers. And that's really important for him, especially being one of the, I'm not going to put it that way, but he's not a good returner, right? So he's going to have to play a lot of breakers. And those are big time moments that he's done well with, outside the top 2, top 3 players in the world. His first semifinal here pushes Djokovic to 3, and the third set being a breaker. The guy's got it. And I think Draper's maybe more of a polished lefty, but with this injury, I do have to put Shelton ahead.
Immediate form as well, even if we think of Draper being healthy, I think Shelton's form is just slightly better. Obviously, he goes much deeper at Wimbledon. Ben has also He played Mallorca, although I think he played one match there and lost it to Lerner Tien. A match I didn't watch. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, he also lost, by the way, first round in Queens. But I'm just probably thinking, therefore, he made the semis as well in Stuttgart. So I would say, it's pretty much all about Wimbledon. But I think if you throw in a semis in Stuttgart and a quarters at Wimbledon, then you go, he's had a good grass court season, especially as I still think that I think it'll always be the case that it'll probably be hard, probably grass, I think, eventually. And then clay, that'll be the order of you could argue that clay, maybe he's had some good results as well, but I still think ultimately clay will be the third surface for him. I don't think it'll be a mega differential. It won't be quite, with the exception of that Rome win that Medvedev have, it won't be quite the extremes that we see with Daniil. But for me, Shelton has absolutely everything to be in this top 10. I don't mean everything in the game. As you say, the return has a lot of room for improvement. But Shelton he ticks all the boxes to be somewhere in your power rankings. He's got Grand Slam pedigree. Well, I'm just trying to think. What he got in the semifinals in 23 in New York and went out to Tiafoe a bit earlier last year.
Right.
Then he makes the Australian Open semifinals this year. Got two hard court Grand Slam semifinals and a grass court now with Wimbledon quarterfinals. So in the last sort of 2 years, basically across, I'm going to say 8 Grand Slams, he's been in the quarterfinals or further in 3 of them. And basically, we're not talking about the French Open here. And suddenly, if you take the French Open away from that, you're talking about 6 Grand Slams, and he's going deep or quarterfinals or further in 3 of them. And he comes alive on a hard court, and I think New York and all the rest of it. Probably just that loss to Tiafoe is a slight thing, but that can happen. And his form is pretty good. Quarterfinals at Wimbledon, like I say, semifinals in Stuttgart. His clay court season actually was all right. I mean, getting to the 4th round and losing to eventual winner Carlos Alcaraz in 4 sets is fine. Taking a set off Carlos, it's not bad. Okay, he got a walkover in the 2nd round there, but yeah, I think his form is pretty good. There's a final in Munich to throw in as well, so he's not won a title yet this year, but yeah, that's semi-finals in Australia again, losing to Jannik there. Some people are a little bit down on his loss to Jannik at Wimbledon. I sort of see it if you want to sort of, if you're desperate like we all are to see players challenge Carlos and Jannik. And maybe he lost that one a bit meekly, a little bit, but it's Jannik Sinner. And if Ben can get to the conversation to be the 3rd or 4th best player in the world, even if you just look at it over a 3 or 4 month period. So even if he's like currently ranked 9, but maybe if you look at, the points that he's gained, in the race, for example, or just even look at the last sort of 3 months or 4 months. Yeah, from 4 certainly to where he's on my power rankings at 6, there's a conversation there. If he wins Washington, yeah, I think we can see him moving up the power rankings. I think he's not going to be in the top 2 in any way, shape, or form. If he won every single hardcourt tournament between now and New York, I think he gets to 3. I really do. But for now, he's at 6. Anyway, we should move on. Who's your 5?
Yeah. I'm going with Zverev at 5.
Okay.
I think this it's a tough placement with him, especially given the season that we've seen. You start in Australia, get to the final, underperform, or maybe not at all. And then it's just kind of been a roller coaster since. And now we see him doing a little training with Tony Nadal, just trying to incorporate some sort of spark, some sort of change in his game. I feel like he does kind of still think of himself as, a hot topic, a big dog on the block. And, he's still going out early. Obviously, it was just first round of Wimbledon to Rinderknecht. And those type of players do cause him trouble. That's the problem. Yeah. It's just from the ground, it just doesn't look as strong. But I think getting back on the hard courts and, really nailing down that serve, getting a lot more free points and kind of loosening up. But I do feel like he does feel the pressure in a sense, and this being the last slam where he's underperformed kind of all season. He is looking for that one. But I think this is a healthy placement for him. If he is going up against Shelton, yeah, that match can go 4 or 5. But just in those extended rallies, you kind of feel a little bit more comfortable, and that backhand still being so strong, I put him there.
Yeah, just the one title for him this year, and that came in Munich on the clay, 35-14. So 14 losses, and some of them coming quite early. In particular, that one, of course, at Wimbledon just recently to Rinderknech. I've got though. Well, I'll come to Zverev in a moment because actually he's slightly. It is kind of Zverev related, but I will also add my 5 in as well as part of this conversation. I think with Zverev, I think it would be difficult to put him at 3, and I think it would be. I would be raising an eyebrow if you put him at 6 or below, and if you put him at 7, I'd be thinking, I'm sorry, you've still got to take a huge amount of stock in Zverev's. So basically, you and I have just slightly flipped. I've got Fritz at 5 and Zverev at 4, and so I'll answer why for both of those, and then I'm guessing you've got Fritz at 4, right?
Correct.
So I'll sort of cover my Fritz Zverev and then shift over to you to talk about Fritz at 4. Those two head-to-heads, we all know about it. We know that Fritz dominates Zverev and that is a smallish factor, but we have no idea what the draw is going to look like. We have no idea if they're going to meet each other. So it's a tiny, tiny factor. It's a factor in a way which I think I used at Wimbledon, for example, because I just wasn't sure. If you've got a dead heat between two players, then fine, sure, I'll probably put Fritz ahead of Zverev. But even though Fritz got to the final at the US Open last year, the pedigree for Zverev across slams on a hard court, at least anyway, but you throw in the French Open too, I guess. But a hard court slams, I'm thinking Australian Open final this year. I'm thinking US Open final of 2020. I'm thinking 2021 semi-final, 2022 injured, 2023. I'm going to say quarterfinals. I know he beat Sinner, I think, in the fourth round there, I think, in 2023. But I think he might have lost to Novak. Or maybe Medvedev in 2023. 2023 US Open for Zverev. It's a conversation we were having just before we hit record, actually. Oh, he actually lost to Alcaraz. Okay, yeah, I do remember that now. Yeah, but he was completely messed up from that quarterfinal, that fourth round. Sorry, he had with Sinner, where both players at various points in that match could barely walk. It was in the end, it was just Jannik couldn't walk as much as Zverev in the end. And that's what basically was the determining factor behind it. And so he's a shadow of himself going into that quarterfinal against Alcaraz, and he lost it fairly comfortably in straight sets. But and then 2024 US Open, what was his record there? Losing to Fritz in the quarterfinals. But he's there or thereabouts pretty much at every US Open in recent years. When I say there or thereabouts, I mean he's going deep pretty much all the time. And despite post Australia, it has been rough. I think probably I'm gonna say 13 losses in that. I know he's had 14 for the year. I just don't know if he played a tournament before Australia. A lot of the big guys don't. And we played United Cup and he won both his matches there, albeit that Germany went out. But his first loss came to Sinner in the final in Australia, and then he's gone on to lose 13 times since. There was the probably weird decision now looking back in joining the South American tour, the Golden Swing there, that just maybe didn't quite look right from the beginning. Although having said that, I did predict him to win Rio. I do remember that. And he's kind of not really recovered since then. He had a really sort of disappointing spell, losing to Teen in Acapulco, Griekspoor in Indian Wells, and then Fils in Miami. So yeah, that's his sort of, and I almost don't mind too much his clay court season, but then that rough early loss at Wimbledon. So there's a lot, but there's so many players on tour that are just much better in 5 sets and much better in slams and much better, say, for example, in New York than they are in Australia, or much better across the hard court slams than the other two. And he's just there. He's just there. Now, he might have a rough few weeks on the hard courts, and that might bring him down a few spots. But yeah, I've just got him ahead of Fritz, I think, for that pedigree. Fritz has been in a final in New York a year ago. Very good. did Fritz take my breath away with any of those wins, or did he? Yeah, I guess the Zverev one is probably the most impressive. I think he, I'm just trying to think. He beat Tiafoe in the semis, but for me that was just really likely to happen. I actually couldn't see Francis winning that one. He doesn't play Yannick or Carlos for one reason or another, and obviously plays Yannick in the final. But yeah, I just feel as though I'm just a little bit more confident about Zverev, say, getting to the semis than Taylor. But it's close, and we're pretty very similar on our choices. I think we're going to be identical for the final three as well.
Right.
Do you want to just add something on Fritz at number 4 and then tell us?
Yeah. I mean, that's why we're doing it, John, because I'm just thinking a little bit of the opposite. I have a little bit more belief in Fritz himself, believing that he can, win these big time matches. I know this is kind of a random match, and I'm going to point it out, but a turning point for me, obviously, after beating Zverev multiple times, winning those baseline rallies, it was the win over Medvedev in Turin, actually, where I think Medvedev started to kind of fiddle with his racket. If you remember,
that match,
yeah, where Medvedev didn't really check out, but Fritz was really, winning these extended rallies, and the shot making was on display. And I think this is, once again, perfect time of the year for Taylor Fritz. I think it used to be Atlanta. They had a tournament, a little small 250 to start this swing, and he would go down and get warm there and go from there. But yeah, you do mention it, a little bit of an asterisk last year, given that you don't have to see Carlos Alcaraz at all. And but nonetheless, he does get it done. I think Tiafoe was kind of not bossing that match, but kind of had his nose out in front, if I remember correctly. And then Fritz kind of just took hold of it in the 5th. I think Tiafoe kind of gave out, but ultimately it's just my belief in Fritz's self-belief, if that makes sense. I think he trusts himself a little bit more.
Listen, as you were talking to me, I did start to just think about even that Wimbledon loss that Taylor had to Carlos, and yeah, it was an interesting match, really. For probably the first set, I think that Carlos won from memory. That was sort of a drifting set for me in terms of a viewing experience. Did Taylor win the second? I think he did. And then maybe Carlos won the third, and it was the 4th set that really had me, especially the tie break that he has some set points on, or at least he has a good lead in that by, I think, 2 or 3 points over Carlos, and then he let that slip. But we could easily have seen a 5th set, and I still think there's a very, very good chance, around about 80% chance, maybe even 90, that Carlos wins that in 5. But again, it just would probably just give him a little bit more of a feather in his bow, or whatever it is. I don't know, whatever, a little more string in it, another string in his bow, and just to suggest that, yeah, maybe he should be at my number 4. But it's nip and tuck.
It is
not one that's I mean, audiences can get outraged over the smallest of things. I would be surprised if we get too many people getting angry in the comments about our Fritz and Zverev order there. Yeah, well, let us know in the comments below. Shall we go to your number 3?
Yep, Novak Djokovic. I guess this is purely off experience, mentality, and being, one of whatever, greatest of all time. Just such a champion. And I think he knows his days are numbered in a sense. And we were talking a little bit about it before we went on air, is, kind of ranking where his best chances are. US Open, not really the one that comes to mind, but for Novak, I think he just has to warm himself up. We saw that he's not going to play in Toronto. So he'll likely play in Cincinnati, where he won it 2 years ago. We remember that epic with Alcaraz in the final. But the guy just knows how to win. He meets the moment. And it's just, I feel like, a little bit of a mental battle for all those guys that trail him. Fritz, Zverev, Shelton, Draper.
It's a tricky one with Novak, I think, because you sort of, I think outside of Wimbledon anyway, I think Wimbledon, you have to put him in at 3, and in fact, that's sort of where he justified it in terms of getting the semis. And I actually feel, you know, as though he probably deserves to be at 3 here a little bit more than maybe at the French, for example, where there could be an argument for putting him at 4, 5, 6, or 7. Let's say going into the French this year. Now, you could say, yeah, but what about that amazing win he owed over Zverev? And you're absolutely right. But that happens during the French Open. And I think Clay and the French Open, who knows? Listen, the fact that he doesn't win Wimbledon this year, I think will certainly play into his thinking in terms of, I'm going to give Wimbledon another crack again next year. I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen, but he might go, you know what? I'm going to skip either the French Open or maybe even the clay season next year, as we saw Roger do from time to time towards the end of his career. He might do that because he might just go, you know what? There's only, I still think really there is only one slam now left, and it is Wimbledon. It could be New York, by the way, or it could be Australia as well. And I just think that he could compete with Carlos in particular on grass at Wimbledon. I think he could make that very tricky for Carlos. And I just think that the gap grows elsewhere between him and Carlos and him and Yannick, particularly, I think, on clay. You might well look at the score lines from what happened at the French Open against Yannick and what happened at Wimbledon. But I still think Novak was pretty off it this year. I think physically he was struggling in that Yannick loss at Wimbledon. So I just think that's where it is. I think that there's the gap between the big two and him narrows on the grass and at Wimbledon. And it also probably grows between Novak and the field. I mean, we talk about Zverev, for example, and probably to another extent, Shelton and Draper and Medvedev. And I'm looking at my list here, Tommy Paul and those other guys, and you could keep going back, Rublev and so on. Suddenly, Djokovic is quite far ahead of them, at least right now. It might be different come 2026. I've heard a lot of people talking about, and so Djokovic is my number 3 as well. I've heard a lot of people talking about Djokovic and where they see his career going. I know that Novak from time to time has said, I want to keep going as long as I can, and he's circled the LA Olympics. I think not even Novak can look into a crystal ball that far ahead. I know that some people have said, oh, but if he keeps losing to Carlos and Yannick, that's true, but he will still circle Wimbledon 2026 and go, do you know what? I might play. It's Yannick in particular is a big one for him. I think he's obviously beaten Carlos from time to time in big matches at the Olympics last year, and then of course also in Australia this year. But he might look at it and go, I might not have to beat Yannick Sinner to win Wimbledon. I might not. You know, maybe Carlos and Yannick are ranked 1 and 3, maybe a year from going into Wimbledon next year, for example, and they play each other in the semis. Or maybe he's in Carlos's half of the draw and Yannick doesn't make the final. I mean, these are not wild things. I mean, it's also 10 months away from now, so we don't know what. I mean, we're assuming that Carlos and Yannick are going to dominate the slams, especially the natural surfaces, I think. And there's a good case for that. But there's also a case to say that at some point in the next 2 or 3 years, one or both of them are not going to make the final. Okay, just for whatever reason. These things happen, okay? And, you know, grass being that slightly more inconsistent surface, Novak has an incredible serving day, for example. And therefore, so I actually think that he could play Yannick Sinner 5 times in the next 9 months. And that's not going to prompt him to retire, even if he lost all 5. He could play Carlos Alcaraz 4 or 5 times in the next 9 months and lose them all. I don't think he's retiring before it. So I think the bigger concern regarding Novak going forward is actually the field. I think if the field starts swallowing him up and then he's dropping outside, and he could drop outside the top 10 because he doesn't play enough tournaments, but also it'll be another indication. He drops outside the top 10, players that he was beating from the back of the court in lengthy rallies like Casper Ruud, Andre Rublev, to some extent, Daniil Medvedev as well, Stefanos Tsitsipas, you know, these guys that he just pretty much not quite owned Medvedev, but the other one certainly he's owned. If he starts losing to those guys, wherever, and also if he's still sort of, I think US Open a year ago, there was a motivational issue, and there has been as well across other parts of the tour. But if he's getting overtaken, Jakub Mensik as well, you know, beat him in Miami this year, that's when he'll call it a day. I think until then, the gap between him and Sinner and Alcaraz could even grow a little bit, and he can just get beaten by them constantly. But he's still going to go, you know what, I've got at least one more Wimbledon, and some things can happen. And it doesn't take a crazy turn of events for him to be in the final, for example. Let's say. He's not far.
I'll wrap up the Djokovic conversation before we get into the final two. But my point is, like, his mindset is so clear, it feels like, right? He's very vocal about, essentially, I just care about the slams.
Yeah.
And we look at a season, I don't know, loses to Opelka, then it's US semi, or I'm sorry, Australian semi, and that's due to injury. And then you think it's like, okay, now it's about title 100, right?
Yeah,
loses a kind of like a heartbreaker in Miami, two tie breaks to Mensik. It was just Mensik's week, right? But yes, he does get that title in Geneva.
Yep.
So he gets 100. That box is checked, and then I was so impressed with that Roland Garros performance. If Sinner isn't on it like he was, I think that goes 5, and I thought he brought a really, really good brand of tennis, and that got me very, very. It was encouraging, heading into.
He's still single figures for losses this year. Now I know he's obviously played a bit less than players like Zverev, but he's 9 losses. Okay, and I remember a lot of early-ish losses in his season, and especially I think there was a spell where maybe he lost 2, 3, 4 in a row in the first round.
Was there a Botic in there in Indian Wells by chance, or
he's lost to Botic this year at some point. I think could well have been Indian Wells. Let me just I've got his year on the, so he's 26 and 9 for the year, and there's a Botic list in Indian Wells, 3 sets. I mean, he also lost to Nardi, didn't he, in 3, I think it was 3 sets a year before that as well. And actually it was Indian Wells last year when him and Goran, I think that was their last tournament together.
Okay.
And him and Goran are still, very, very close, and Goran will never say anything bad about him, of course not. But I think that Goran has put it out that one of the reasons why they went their separate ways is that he felt that, this is going back to the Nardi loss and that tournament, that Novak just wasn't really super up for it. And I think there's been slams aside, it's always been like, is he going deep? And then he suddenly comes alive. And that's what happened in Miami. He had a really kind run, I would suggest, in Miami. Okay, Musetti, maybe you might say round of 16 was tricky, but once he goes up a break in both sets there, that gets done. So I mean, he's got a bye in the first round there, Hijikata in the second, Ugo Carabelli in the third, and he's also got Dimitrov, which again is someone that he's owned largely so in the semis. So it was a nice draw. But once you've got that nice draw and suddenly you're in the quarters, then he comes alive. And again, same thing in a way in Geneva, because of course he's losing. So this run of losing his first matches came in Monte Carlo and Madrid. So he loses his first matches there. So it's just 2 matches in a row. But I mean, obviously losing to Mensik, so it becomes 3 in a row. But then he goes on a run in Geneva, and again, it's a 250, so maybe it's going to be a bit kinder, but not a bad run to that title, with a bye in the first round followed by Fucsovics, Arnaldi, Norrie in the semis is nice for him, and then Hurkacz in the final. But he's my number 3, and I think that's, again, I think most people you'll get some weird ones, but I think most people in the comments will be like, 3's right. You can't. It's probably the most. I think the first 3 are all pretty solid, and then after that, it's up to you really. But I think I would make if anyone put the first 3 in any different order, then I would be saying, really. So your number 2 is
Carlos Alcaraz.
Mine as well. And your number 1 is
Jannik Sinner.
Mine as well. Now, your thinking behind that. I'm going to ask you a question here and then probably answer it myself. If Alcaraz wins Wimbledon, does that change this order for you?
Not for me. Not for me. I still think it's it would be maybe not out of line, because everyone has their opinion, but I just think Sinner is just far more suited to the truer conditions. I think on a hard court, you just get such pure bounces, and The guy's a ball machine, right? I mean, just hits such a heavy ball. You talk about what Shelton said about Sinner, and like I said, Shelton been awesome. He's played all these good guys, and really his levels really rose to the occasion. But with Sinner, it's just a different ball, and he hits it so heavy, so powerful, and it just doesn't stop. And you do get a break point. There's a flat serve wide. The guy just comes up with it again and again. And I think, well, now that I think about that question, if he loses to Alcaraz in an interesting fashion, yeah, maybe it's a little bit more in his head, but we've already seen the mental side of him too. I mean, the guy comes back from that scenario, and the Wimbledon final, I feel like we would be on the same page here. It never really felt like Alcaraz had a grip on the match.
It didn't know. I made quite a last-minute prediction on that one that Sinner would win it in 4, as it turned out. But let's just more importantly say that Sinner would win it. Because actually, I probably was saying Alcaraz during the tournament, and for sure I had Alcaraz at 1 in the power rankings. It was probably, even just the hours building up for one reason or another, I just came to the conclusion, actually, Jannik is winning this. And I think that the fact that I'd seen him shrug off that French Open loss, not as quickly as he did, because I think quickly would have been winning Halle. And so him losing to Bublik in Halle did make me think, okay, I think that may be just something going on there, or maybe just the fact that he was a bit exhausted from the French Open exploits. But when I saw him move through the gears at Wimbledon, obviously he has the Dimitrov one, and we all know about that. But once he moves through the gears in the wins over Shelton and Novak as well. And I know Novak was a bit compromised in his movement and where he was at physically in that, but also Jannik was wildly good in that semi-final. And I just thought, I also thought this as well. I knew about was it 5 in a row that Carlos had won before against Jannik? Yeah, I think so. But I also thought about how I remember thinking in Rome, do you know what? Theoretically, Carlos should win this, and he probably should win it in straight sets. Just because of Jannik hadn't played any competitive tennis for 3 months, I think it was, wasn't it? From Australia, maybe even 4 months, even from Australia to Rome. So therefore, this guy, and Carlos was healthy by Rome. I know he had that injury in Barcelona, but he was certainly healthy by that final, and he shrugged off. And so he should, and yet it was competitive certainly for one set. I mean, that tiebreak was very close until I think some good serving from Carlos and so on and so forth. So he's close there, and it's probably about the result I would expect from the two players, just where they were at in their seasons. By the time the French Open comes around, maybe Carlos should still be winning that one, and I know he does win it, but maybe he should be winning more points than Jannik's in that final, which of course he wins one less. And so Jannik probably, wins that in 4 sets, and maybe even wins it in 5. He has chances in the 5th as well, in a way. And so you're thinking, wow, okay. And so I think that was in my thinking. So it's not quite the same. There's a lot of differences, and we're talking over the period of years, but it was just like Nadal getting closer to Roger, especially on the grass, and just like, I think he's going to overtake him this year. And that's what happened in 2008. And I was just sort of feeling a similar thing. So even though Carlos won the previous 2, which then augments this momentum, it was a momentum that was slowing. It wasn't a momentum that was gathering pace. That's probably what I ultimately mean. And I thought it had slowed enough for Jannik to get the job done in that Wimbledon final. Coming back to his, sort of number 1 status here for me. I mean, since he turned the corner in the Asian swing of 2023, I say turned a corner, it's the wrong expression. Since he elevated himself to top 2, top 3 in the world, so much so that he beats Novak, I think, twice in 3 meetings. First of all, in the round robin stage at the ATP finals in Turin in 23. Okay, he gets soundly beaten in the final, but then he saves those match points against Novak in the Davis Cup and wins that. And you're like, okay, this is another level now from Jannik. This is number 1-ish. And then he goes into the Australian Open, beats Novak in the semis, wins the Australian Open final. Since then, he's not lost a Grand Slam hard court match. So what's that? 7, 14, 21 matches. And he's also probably not dropping that many sets.
I was going to say, last year it was 1.
One en route to the title in New York.
That is correct. It
Was
was
it in the first
Oh
round?
no, actually two. I
Okay.
apologize. It was two. One versus in round one versus
Yeah.
Mackie McDonald.
I think he went down a set and a break in that, by the way. He loses the
Really?
first game. I think he lost the first game of the second set, which was on his serve.
Yeah. And then he
And I
goes
think does he win the second set 6-1 or 6-2 or
he
something?
goes 2-1-2.
Yeah, so I think he loses 2 games, and the first one was on his serve. But yeah, that was the match starting, and then his tournament starting as well after he went down a set and a break. And so yeah, so he's not even dropping many sets. And then when you just throw in the Carlos factor and even New York as well, obviously he won it in 2022, including that incredible win over Yannick as well. So also a lot of these wins that Carlos has got over Yannick have been super, super fine, easily go either way. Yeah, exactly. And so then 23, he has that really disappointing semi-final loss to Daniil Medvedev last year, losing to Boris van der Zandschulp, our good friend. So yeah, it's a little sketchy. Let's say we all know about Carlos's travails in Australia. It's not quite the same in New York because he's obviously won that title in 2022. It doesn't mean that we don't get another final between the two, and I'm extremely excited. And I'm thinking this could go 4 or 5, and it's probably a 60-40. A lot will depend on how they get to the final. If maybe Yannick leaks a few sets and Carlos actually shows that he's sort of back to that sort of 22 US Open best in a way, then yeah, that may even get close to that gap. But I think the first 3 is a no-brainer. And then probably the next, so this is our list, then between 4 and 7, maybe even 4 and 8, I think you have to have those 4 players. So obviously I'm just going to go through them. Sinner has to be 1, I think, and Alcaraz has to be 2, and Djokovic has to be 3. And that's obviously you and I've got the same. I think you can put Zverev and Fritz, whichever order you want. You could even put, Zverev down at 6 and Shelton up or whatever. Draper as well, obviously the health thing. I just think you have to, if someone doesn't have Daniil Medvedev in their 10, I'm not going to be outraged by it, but I am going to be like, I still think you've got to, think about it. Paul is my 9, Mensik is my 10. Sure, you can exchange Rune and Tiafoe and maybe even Rublev or Hachinov as well, and I'm okay with that. Those 2 are extremely vulnerable, but yeah, that's it. Any final words on this?
No, I'm just looking forward to next week.
I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out because, like I say, someone wins Washington, especially if they're from that group of near misses, if you like, and even sort of just beyond the near misses. Let's say Rublev is not one of my near misses, but if he wins Washington, I think he's in the 10. And given that Mensik and Paul are not playing, obviously they're extremely vulnerable. Draper with that injury as well will probably slip down the thing. And if Medvedev loses a bunch of matches and doesn't go beyond 2nd or 3rd rounds, then again he's vulnerable as well. I think if Shelton lost every match between now and New York, yeah, probably he's vulnerable to going out of the 10.
Yeah.
I think Zverev, for example, would lose every match between now and New York, and he would slip down the rankings, but he'd probably still stay in the 10 somehow, somewhere. And I don't envisage the 3 changing. What might change is, of course, with Cincinnati regarding those first 3. If Djokovic won Cincinnati, or if Djokovic won Cincinnati, I can see him moving up to 2. I think it would be, even if he beats Sinner in straight sets in the final, I think it would still have Sinner at 1. But if he beats Alcaraz and Sinner en route to the title, then in Cincinnati, he's got to probably go up to 2. I think Alcaraz is not a certain to be at 2, especially as I think Djokovic has shown that he's still very, very close. In fact, maybe even ahead of Carlos, and certainly has been the last 2 matches. I think unless Sinner goes out first round and Alcaraz wins Cincinnati or first match, and even in that scenario, I think I'll probably still go with Yannick first and Carlos second. But yeah, there's an argument there. But that's going to be for the future. This little episode that I said we'll race through in 20 minutes, of course, is now hitting the 60-minute mark. Any final words on this before we resume in a week from now?
I'm all good, John. Great fun covering this, and looking forward to how it shakes up.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.